was born Linda Rose Mitchell, became Linda Westbrook when I married Samuel in 1983, and remained that person until 4 weeks ago, the day after we laid him to rest. I'm 66 years old with weathered hands that still remember how to knead the cinnamon rolls my son Derek used to request every Saturday morning, and the way my daughter Rachel's curls felt when I brushed them before school pictures. I'm sharing this so you understand that before everything shattered, I was simply a mother who believed she had raised decent children. Samuel's heart disease took 18 months to claim him, congestive heart failure, the gradual thief that gives you time to say goodbye but never enough time to truly prepare for the emptiness that follows. We kept the diagnosis private initially, just between us. Our children had their own lives, Derek with his investment banking career in Chicago that seemed to demand his presence at every crucial family moment, and Rachel with her string of boutique ventures in Seattle that perpetually required another, small loan, from Dad. They don't need this burden yet, Samuel had said, his voice tired from another sleepless night. Let them have a few more months without this shadow. I agreed because I loved him, but I understood our children better than he did. When they finally arrived at our century-old Victorian in Millbrook, Connecticut, the same house where they'd grown up, where Samuel and I had transformed Westbrook Vineyards from 12 neglected acres into one of New England's most respected organic wineries, they didn't come bearing comfort. They came with calculators. "Mom, we need to be practical," Derek said, his tone carrying that patronizing edge he'd perfected after his first corporate promotion. We sat in the conservatory, Samuel resting upstairs, when he first mentioned the situation. "The medical expenses must be overwhelming. Have you considered scaling back? The vineyard can't be manageable for someone your age." Derek had fled Millbrook at 19, calling small-town Connecticut suffocating as the vines that paid for his education. He'd visited sporadically, usually staying at the Marriott downtown because the old house aggravates my allergies. Yet suddenly, during his father's final weeks, he developed an intense interest in the family business that had embarrassed him throughout his youth. Rachel arrived 2 days later with 4 designer suitcases and the scent of expensive desperation. 7 retail ventures in 9 years, each launched with her father's capital, each abandoned when success required actual effort. But she held Samuel's hand with genuine tears and stayed beside his bed the night he passed, which is why I still wrestle with what followed. The funeral was intimate, exactly as Samuel would have wanted. He was buried on the hillside overlooking the vineyard where the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn. I stood between my children as they lowered him into the earth, Derek's arms rigid around my shoulders, Rachel clutching a lace handkerchief I'd never seen before. "He's at peace now," Pastor Montgomery said, and I wondered if that was truth or just something people say when someone dies after prolonged suffering. Samuel and I weren't particularly devout, but we'd maintained the social expectation of holiday church attendance, enough that Pastor Montgomery knew to focus on Samuel's connection to the land rather than promises of heavenly reunion. What I remember most about that day was the silence that followed. The house echoed with it as neighbors brought casseroles and spoke in hushed tones about Samuel's generosity, his integrity, how he'd helped the Rodriguez family save their farm during the recession, or employed the Thompson boys when they needed summer work. Nobody mentioned how he'd built our vineyard from nothing while raising 2 children who seemed to have inherited none of his values. "I've prepared the guest rooms," I told Derek and Rachel that evening as the last visitors departed. "I thought we could spend tomorrow sorting through some of your father's belongings together." "About that, Mom," Derek said, setting down his wine glass with precision that reminded me of his father. "Rachel and I have been discussing this, and we think it's best if we handle things efficiently. We both need to return to our responsibilities." "Handle things?" I asked. "The estate," Rachel clarified, scrolling through her phone. "The house, the business. Derek and I need to determine the next steps." I'd expected grief from my children, perhaps some reminiscing about their father. Instead, I got a board meeting. Derek opened his laptop on the dining table where we'd celebrated their birthdays, their graduations, their departures. "Dad discussed this with me last year," he said, avoiding my eyes. "He was concerned about you managing alone. The vineyard needs modernization, investment. The house is too much for someone your age. My age? I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. I've managed this vineyard alongside your father for 40 years. And you've done wonderfully, Rachel said in the same voice she used when pitching overpriced skincare to desperate women. But it's time to consider your future, Mom. A senior community would provide companionship, activities. I have companionship. I have activities. This is my home. It's all of our home, Derek corrected. And Dad left the business to Rachel and me in the will. He wanted us to care for you, but he knew the vineyard needed younger leadership. I stared at my son, this stranger in expensive clothes who presumed to understand anything about the soil that had nourished him, the vines his father had coaxed through drought and disease and frost. Show me the will. He slid a document across the table, not our family attorney's letterhead, but something printed on Derek's corporate stationery. Samuel's signature looked wrong somehow, too controlled, too steady for hands that had trembled with medication for months. You had him sign this while he was on painkillers. The fury that rose in me was primal, something I hadn't felt since I'd watched a hawk try to snatch chickens from our coop when the children were small. I chased it off with a broom and the kind of rage that comes from protecting what's yours. He was lucid, Derek insisted. He wanted us to have a fresh start with the business. There's a developer interested in the land. Developer. For a luxury housing community, Rachel explained, her eyes bright with the prospect of money. They'll pay $8 million, Mom. We can all start fresh. Fresh. As if the life Samuel and I had built was something stale, something to be discarded. As if the legacy of Westbrook Vineyards, our sustainable practices, our refusal to sell to corporate distributors who would exploit our workers, our annual donation of wine for charity auctions, was nothing compared to cookie-cutter mansions for wealthy weekenders from Manhattan. Your father would never sell this land for development, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I didn't sign anything. You don't need to, Derek explained with practiced patience. The business was in Dad's name. The house too. Connecticut isn't a community property state. I knew then that they had planned this, not just after Samuel fell ill, but perhaps before. How long had my son been waiting for his father to die so he could liquidate our life's work? How many times had Rachel called not to check on Samuel's health but to ensure their scheme was progressing? I need time, I said, standing. I'm going to bed. We'll discuss this tomorrow. But there would be no discussion. While I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with Samuel, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of our old house, my children were finalizing their betrayal. Morning came with the aroma of expensive coffee, the kind Derek had brought from Chicago because our local brand was undrinkable. I dressed slowly, my joints stiff with grief and age and the cold knowledge of what my children had become. When I came downstairs, they were waiting with a small overnight bag I didn't recognize. We packed some essentials for you, Rachel said brightly. Derek and I thought we'd drive you to visit Sunset Manor today. It's a beautiful senior community just 90 minutes from here. I'm not going to any senior community, I replied, pouring myself coffee. This is my home. Mom, be reasonable, Derek said. The paperwork is complete. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here. I looked at my son then, really looked at him, and saw nothing of Samuel in his face. Nothing of the boy who had once followed his father through the vineyard at sunrise, asking endless questions about pruning and harvest. Nothing but a stranger who saw me as an obstacle to be managed. I need my medication from the bathroom, I said quietly. And I'd like to gather some photographs. Of course, Mom, Rachel agreed, relief evident in her voice. Take whatever personal items you want. We can ship the rest later. I moved through my home one final time, touching the carved newel post Samuel had restored himself, the quilt my mother had made that covered our bed, the window seat where I'd read stories to my children on rainy afternoons. In the bathroom, I retrieved my medications but also slipped my passport and birth certificate from the concealed compartment in the medicine cabinet, the one Samuel had installed when we first worried about break-ins in the 90s. In our bedroom closet, behind Samuel's collection of wool sweaters that still carried his scent, I retrieved the small fireproof safe containing the one thing my children didn't know about. When I came downstairs, my purse heavier but my heart somehow lighter with resolve, Derek was checking his watch. "Ready?" he asked, not really a question. I nodded, allowing Rachel to take my arm as if I were already the frail old woman they wanted me to be. We drove in Derek's rental car, a sleek silver sedan with leather seats that stuck to the backs of my legs. I watched my home disappear through the rear window, memorizing the sight of autumn vines heavy with unpicked grapes, the weathered stone of our tasting room, the copper weather vane Samuel had installed the summer before Derek was born. We drove past Millbrook small downtown, past the library where I still volunteered, past the community center where I taught cooking classes on Tuesday evenings. But instead of continuing toward the cities where senior communities clustered, Derek turned onto Route 44, a rural road that cut through farmland before eventually connecting to the highway. 30 minutes later, he pulled onto the shoulder beside an empty field. The engine idled as he turned to look at me. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said, his voice eerily calm. "The house and business are mine now." "What?" Even Rachel seemed confused. "Derek, what are you doing?" "What we discussed," he snapped. "Mom's not going to make this easy. She'll contest the will, create scenes, embarrass us with the developer. This is cleaner. But she has her medication, some clothes, there's a convenience store about 3 miles up. She can call one of her cooking friends." He reached across me to open my door. "Get out, Mom." I looked at my son, searching for any trace of the child I'd loved, and found nothing. Then I turned to my daughter, whose wide eyes darted between us, her mouth opening and closing. "Rachel?" I asked, but I already knew she'd comply with him. She always had. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "It's just, we need this money. I have obligations." I nodded once, gathered my purse and the small bag they'd packed, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The October air was crisp, scented with dying leaves and the promise of winter. I stood there clutching my bag as Derek drove away without looking back, Rachel's pale face visible through the rear window until they crested a hill and vanished. No phone, no money, or so they thought. Just my name and what they didn't know I still possessed. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. I was free. Free from pretending these people deserved my love simply because I had given them life. Free from the burden of maternal obligation to children who saw me as nothing but an impediment. I started walking, not toward the convenience store Derek had mentioned, but toward a future they couldn't imagine. In my purse was my passport, my medication, and a deed, the original deed to 12 acres of land in my maiden name, purchased before I married Samuel, before Westbrook Vineyards expanded. The most valuable 12 acres, as it happened, which included water rights that any developer would require. My children thought they'd left me with nothing. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The walk to town took nearly 3 hours. My shoes, sensible flats I'd worn for my husband's funeral, weren't designed for country roads. By the time I reached Murphy's Corner store at the edge of Millbrook, my feet were blistered and the afternoon sun had burned my neck. I didn't mind. Pain has a way of clarifying things, and with each step, my purpose had crystallized. I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I sat on the bench outside, watching trucks and cars come and go, normal people living normal lives who had no idea that Linda Westbrook, who judged their apple pies at the county fair for 15 years, had just been abandoned like roadkill by her own children. "Mrs. Westbrook." I looked up to see Tom Murphy himself, second-generation owner of the store, wiping his hands on his apron. "You all right? You're looking a bit peaked." "Just resting, Tom. It's been a long day." He nodded, glancing at my overnight bag. "Real sorry about Samuel. He was a good man." "Yes, he was." I straightened my spine. "Tom, could I use your phone? I seem to have misplaced mine." "Of course you can." He led me inside, past the beer coolers and snack displays to the small office behind the counter. "Take your time." I didn't call any of my cooking friends, as Derek had suggested. I called Vincent Martinez, our family attorney of 25 years. "Linda. I tried reaching you yesterday. I was surprised not to see you at the reading." My hand tightened on the receiver. "What reading, Vincent?" Silence stretched across the line. "The will reading. Your son presented a document, but I had concerns. I've been trying to contact you." "I've been indisposed," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Vincent, I need your help. And I need discretion. You have both." "My office, 1 hour." "I'll be there." I bought a cheap prepaid phone with cash I kept hidden in a compartment of my purse, emergency money Samuel had insisted we both carry after getting stranded with a dead battery years ago. I also purchased a bottle of water and a sandwich I had no appetite for. Tom refused payment. "On the house, Linda. You need anything else, you just ask." His kindness nearly broke me. Nearly. But I hadn't cried when they lowered Samuel into the ground, and I wouldn't cry now. Vincent's law office occupied a renovated colonial on Main Street. When his secretary saw me, her eyes widened. "Mrs. Westbrook. Mr. Martinez is expecting you." She hurried from behind her desk. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "I'm fine, Helen. Thank you." Vincent met me at his office door, his stocky frame showing his 70 years but his eyes sharp as ever. He'd been 2 years behind Samuel in school, had handled our business incorporation, our wills, everything legal in our lives. "Linda." He guided me to a leather chair, then sat not behind his desk but in the chair beside me. "Tell me what's happening." So I did. The conversation after the funeral, the suspicious will, the drive and abandonment. With each detail, Vincent's expression darkened. "The will they showed you," he said when I finished, "was not the will Samuel and I prepared last year. Their document is a forgery." I suspected as much. I opened my purse and removed the fireproof safe. From it, I withdrew the deed to the original 12 acres. "They don't know about this." Vincent examined the deed, nodding slowly. "Smart. Very smart. You two were always thinking ahead." Samuel suggested putting this portion in my maiden name when we first expanded. Insurance, he called it, in case the business ever failed. And now it's insurance of another kind. Vincent placed the deed carefully on his desk. "What do you want to do, Linda?" I met his eyes. "I want my home back. I want the vineyard my husband built. And I want my children to understand exactly what they've done." Vincent didn't flinch at the coldness in my voice. Instead, he nodded. "Let's start with a place for you to stay tonight. My sister's inn has a vacancy. Tomorrow, we'll begin the legal work." "No," I shook my head. "I need to move faster than that. The developer is closing next week." Understanding dawned in Vincent's eyes. "You're not planning to just go through the courts." "Courts are for people with time, Vincent. I have a better idea." That night, in the rose-papered comfort of Millbrook Inn, I made my first call. Not to my children, they could wonder where I was, whether I'd reached town or collapsed on the roadside. My call was to Patricia Chin, the regional manager of First National Bank, where Westbrook Vineyards had maintained accounts for decades. Mrs. Westbrook, I'm so sorry about your husband. Thank you, Patricia. I'm calling because I've discovered some concerning transactions, and I need your help to protect what's left of our business. My second call was to Michael Torres, the agricultural extension agent who'd worked with us for 12 years. Linda, I was at the funeral but didn't get to speak with you. I know, Michael. It's been chaotic. Listen, I need information about a potential development on protected farmland in the county. My third call was to Jennifer Walsh, editor of the Millbrook Gazette and Samuel's second cousin. Jenny, how are you holding up? I've been worried. I'm managing, Jennifer. But I think there's a story you might be interested in about developers, protected agricultural land, and inheritance fraud. By midnight, I had made 8 calls, each one a thread in the web I was weaving. Outside my window, the quiet streets of Millbrook slept peacefully, unaware that Linda Westbrook, always the peacemaker, always the nurturer, was planning war. In the morning, I met Vincent at his office with a legal pad full of notes. I need you to freeze the business accounts, I told him. And I need you to file an emergency injunction on any sale of the property based on the fraudulent will. Vincent reviewed my notes, his eyebrows rising. This is comprehensive. I had 40 years with Samuel. I know every contract, every client, every detail of that vineyard. I leaned forward. And I'm going to use all of it. Your children won't take this quietly. I'm counting on it. By noon, the pieces were in motion. Vincent had filed the emergency injunction. Patricia had frozen the business accounts pending investigation of suspicious activity. Michael had contacted the Environmental Board about protected wetlands on the proposed development site, wetlands that happened to be on my 12 acres. I sat in Vincent's office, watching the clock tick toward 1 p.m., when my children would discover that their carefully constructed plan had hit its first obstacle. My phone rang, the new prepaid one whose number they shouldn't have known, but Vincent had made sure they'd received it. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice calm. This is Linda. Mom. Derek's voice crackled with barely contained fury. What have you done? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I've only just begun. Mom, be reasonable, Derek's voice hardened through the phone. You can't just freeze accounts and file injunctions. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our deal? Your deal, I corrected. Not mine. Not your father's. Where are you? Rachel cut in, her voice shrill. Derek had clearly put me on speaker. We've been worried sick. The lie hung between us like a poison cloud. They hadn't called the police, hadn't contacted friends. They'd been too busy finalizing their betrayal. Worried that I survived. I asked, my voice perfectly level. Worried that I didn't conveniently disappear. That's not fair, Rachel whined. Derek made a mistake, she began. Shut up, Rachel, Derek snapped. I smiled into the phone. Already fracturing. Listen carefully. I'm giving you one chance to walk away with something. Withdraw your fraudulent will, sign the business and house back to me. In return, I'll give you each a one-time payment of $60,000. After that, we're done. Derek laughed, an ugly sound. You're delusional. You have nothing. The will is legal. The will is a forgery, Vincent interjected, leaning toward the speakerphone on his desk. As the lawyer who drafted Samuel Westbrook's actual will, I can testify to that. Silence stretched across the line. You have 24 hours, I said. After that, the offer expires, and I proceed with fraud charges. I hung up before they could respond. Vincent leaned back in his chair. You realize they'll probably refuse. I'm counting on it, I stood, gathering my purse. Now I need to visit the bank in person. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet meetings in back offices throughout Millbrook. People who had known me for decades, known U.S., Samuel and me, stepped up with information, signatures, and support. Not out of pity, but out of respect, and perhaps a touch of satisfaction at seeing the Westbrook children who had abandoned their hometown for shinier places get their comeuppance. By evening, I'd moved into a small apartment above Sarah's bakery. The owner, Sarah Chin, had been my friend since our children started school together. "Stay as long as you need," she said, pressing the key into my palm. "That boy of yours never did right by this town or by you and Samuel." I slept surprisingly well that night, lulled by the familiar smells of bread and pastry rising from below. In the morning, I dressed in clothes Sarah had lent me, a pair of slacks and a blouse that fit well enough, and prepared for war. At precisely 9 a.m., when the deed office opened, I filed paperwork asserting my ownership of the original 12 acres, property that included the main house, the wine cellar, and most critically, the water access that any developer would need. At 10 a.m., I met with the Agricultural Board about conservation easement Samuel and I had quietly established years ago, restrictions that would make development nearly impossible even if Derek somehow managed to sell. At noon, I sat with Jennifer in the Millbrook Gazette office, providing documentation for a story headlined, "Local Vineyard at Center of Inheritance Dispute, Developer Plans Threaten Protected Agricultural Land." By 2 p.m., my phone was ringing again. "The offer's off the table," I said by way of greeting. "Mom, you're making a terrible mistake." Derek's voice had lost its edge of superiority, replaced by something closer to panic. "The developer's lawyers are threatening to sue if we can't deliver as promised." "That sounds like your problem." "Our problem," Rachel broke in. "Mom, please. I used the advance to cover some obligations. If this falls through, I'll be ruined. You should have thought of that before leaving me on the side of the road." "That was Derek's idea," she cried. "I didn't know until we were already driving." The betrayal between them gave me no satisfaction. Nothing about this gave me satisfaction, only a cold, necessary sense of justice being served. "The bank statements show you withdrew $60,000 3 days before your father's funeral, Rachel." I kept my voice clinical, detached. "Planning your fresh start already, were you?" She began to sob, dramatic, heaving cries I'd heard countless times when she didn't get her way. "It's too late for tears," I continued. "Vincent will send over the paperwork. You both sign, renouncing all claims to Westbrook Vineyards and the house. In return, I won't press charges for fraud, attempted elder abuse, and theft." "And the $60,000? Derek asked, his businessman's mind still calculating. "That offer expired," I replied. "You get to stay out of jail. That's all." I hung up, set down the phone, and stared out the window of Vincent's office at the town where I'd spent my entire adult life. Across the street, the farmer's market was setting up, just as it did every Saturday. People moved about their business, greeting neighbors, examining produce, living normal lives where children didn't abandon mothers on roadsides. "They'll fight," Vincent said, setting a cup of tea beside me. "Let them." I didn't touch the tea. "I have one more call to make." I dialed a number I'd memorized decades ago but rarely used. "Robert? It's Linda Westbrook. I think it's time I called in that favor." Robert Chen had been Samuel's roommate at UConn before either of them met me. They'd remained friends even after Robert moved to Boston to start what would become one of the largest real estate law firms in New England. 25 years ago, Samuel had loaned Robert money when his first practice collapsed, money that helped rebuild a career now known for destroying predatory developers. "Linda." His voice was warm with recognition. "I've been meaning to call since I heard about Samuel. I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Robert. I need your help with a situation. I explained everything, the forgery, the abandonment, the developer. Robert listened without interruption, and when I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. I'll be in Millbrook tomorrow morning, he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. These developers, Emerald Estates, they've been on our radar, Linda. What they're planning violates at least 8 environmental regulations. We've been looking for a way to stop them. And now you have one. Yes. I could hear him shuffling papers. Don't sign anything before I get there. And Linda. I'm sorry about your children. I stopped having children 3 days ago, I replied. Now I just have adversaries. That night, I sat in Sarah's kitchen as she closed the bakery, drinking tea and watching her prepare dough for the morning. You should try to eat something, she said, nodding toward the sandwich she'd made me. You need your strength. I'm not hungry. I hadn't had an appetite since Samuel died. Food was fuel now, nothing more. Heard Rachel staying at the Hampton Inn, Sarah said, kneading with practiced movements. Derek's still at the house. People are talking. Let them talk. The small-town grapevine had always annoyed my children, but now it served me. Every move they made, I knew about within hours. Jennifer's article runs tomorrow, Sarah continued. Front page. Got a call from the Hartford Courant too. They want to pick up the story. Something about the developer having trouble with other projects. I nodded, unsurprised. Robert's call had confirmed what I'd suspected. Emerald Estates had a pattern of targeting vulnerable landowners, particularly the elderly, with promises they never intended to keep. Did I do the right thing, raising them the way we did? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Not sentimentality, but genuine curiosity about where I had failed. Sarah's hand stilled in the dough. You and Samuel were good parents, Linda. Some people just turn out rotten, no matter the soil they're planted in. I accepted her answer with a nod, pushing away the useless question. It didn't matter anymore. The past was buried with Samuel. Only the future and my justice remained. Morning brought Robert Chin, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than 6 months of vineyard profits, striding into Vincent's office with 2 associates trailing behind him. Linda. He embraced me briefly, then immediately turned to business. We've filed injunctions against Emerald Estates in 4 counties already. Now we add yours to the list. For the next 2 hours, I watched a master at work. Robert didn't just understand law, he wielded it like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and devastating. By noon, he had drafted documents that would not only block the sale but potentially trigger a federal investigation into the developer. Your children's signatures, he said, sliding papers across Vincent's desk. We need them to officially renounce their claims based on the fraudulent will. Vincent says they're refusing. They'll sign, I said with certainty. They just need the proper motivation. I pulled out my phone and made another call, this one to David Chin, Patricia's brother and the assistant district attorney for the county. David. It's Linda Westbrook. I'd like to discuss pressing criminal charges. Robert raised an eyebrow but said nothing as I arranged a meeting for later that afternoon. When I hung up, he nodded approvingly. You always were tougher than Samuel gave you credit for. Samuel knew exactly how tough I was, I corrected. He just never thought I'd need to use it against our own children. Just after 2 p.m., my phone rang again. The offer's off the table, I said by way of greeting. Mom, you're making a terrible mistake. Derek's voice had lost its edge of superiority, replaced by something closer to panic. The developer's lawyers are threatening to sue if we can't deliver as promised. That sounds like your problem. We'll sign the papers, he said, his voice clipped and formal. But we want something in writing saying you won't pursue charges. I already offered that yesterday. The terms have changed. What do you want? He sounded defeated, which gave me no pleasure. Be at Vincent's office at 4 p.m. Bring Rachel. I'll lay out my terms then. When they arrived, I was already seated between Robert and Vincent, a united front of legal firepower. My children looked terrible. Derek unshaven, his expensive shirt wrinkled. Rachel with smeared makeup and hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Neither could meet my eyes. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chairs across from us. This won't take long. Robert slid the documents across the table. Mrs. Westbrook has agreed not to pursue criminal charges for the forged will, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft of business assets worth approximately $15 million. In exchange, you will both sign these papers acknowledging the will was fraudulent, renouncing all claims to Westbrook Vineyards, the residential property, and all associated assets. Derek skimmed the document, his face paling. This says we forfeit our inheritance entirely. Yes, I said simply. But that's, Rachel began. Exactly what you tried to do to me, I finished for her. With one difference, I'm offering you a legal way out, not abandonment on a roadside. Mom, please, Rachel's voice cracked. I know we made a terrible mistake, but... Stop. I held up my hand. This isn't a negotiation. Sign, or I walk across the street to the DA's office and file charges. David Chin is waiting for my call. At the mention of the assistant district attorney, Derek's already pale face went ashen. He knew David from high school, another local boy he'd looked down on who had now surpassed him. You'd really do that? Send your own children to jail? There was genuine disbelief in his voice, as if the woman who had made his favorite cookies and bandaged his childhood scrapes couldn't possibly be this cold, this unforgiving. The woman who would have forgiven you anything died on Route 44, I replied evenly. You left her in the dust. Derek looked away first, then reached for the pen Vincent offered. His signature was shaky but legible. Rachel took longer, tears dropping onto the paper as she signed her name. What happens now? She asked in a small voice. Now you leave Millbrook, I said, gathering the signed documents. Both of you. Today. If I see either of you in this town again, I will press charges regardless of what you've signed. And the developer? Derek asked, a last attempt at salvaging something. Robert smiled thinly. Emerald Estates will be formally notified that the property is not and was never for sale. They'll also be receiving notification of our intent to file suit for their part in what appears to be a conspiracy to defraud a widow. They left without another word, shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched through Vincent's window as they walked separately to their cars, Derek to his rental, Rachel to her flashy blue convertible that Samuel had helped her buy last year. Neither looked back at the office. Neither looked at each other. It's done, Vincent said quietly, placing the documents in his safe. But it wasn't done. Not yet. The legal battle was won, but the war, my war, had one final act. I need a ride, I told Robert. Where to? Home. The Westbrook farmhouse looked exactly as I'd left it 5 days earlier, white clapboard siding glowing in the late afternoon sun, Samuel's reading chair still on the front porch where he'd spent his last mobile days watching the vineyard ripen. Only Derek's rental car in the driveway marked any change. Want me to come in with you? Robert asked as he pulled up behind it. No. This part won't do alone. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I moved through the first floor, noting small disturbances, Derek's laptop on the dining table, a half-empty whiskey glass beside it, muddy shoes by the door that he would never have left there when he lived here. Derek? I called out, my voice echoing through the rooms that had witnessed 40 years of my life. No answer. I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister Samuel had carved by hand our first year in the house. At the top, I noticed our bedroom door ajar, light spilling into the hallway. I pushed it open. Derek stood by the window, staring out at the vineyard, his back to me. The room had been ransacked, dresser drawers pulled out, closet doors open, Samuel's possessions, strewn across the bed like debris from a storm. He turned when he heard me. His face was drawn, no longer defiant, just hollow. I was looking for the other deed, he said, not even bothering to lie convincingly. The one you used to block the sale. I know, I replied, stepping fully into the room. But you won't find it here. He looked past me, as if hoping for someone else to appear. Someone who might save him from the weight of his decisions. But there was no one left. I don't understand how you could just turn on us like this, he muttered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You turned first, Derek. You forged your father's signature. You abandoned me on the side of a road. You tried to erase 40 years of love, labor, and legacy, for a payday. He didn't answer. I stepped toward Samuel's dresser, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a small, cloth-bound journal. Samuel's vineyard notes, dates, temperatures, rainfall, pruning experiments. His legacy. I held it up. This is the only inheritance you deserve, Derek. But you wouldn't know what to do with it. I turned and walked out. Down the stairs, out the door, into the fresh air of late autumn. Behind me, the creak of the old floorboards didn't follow. He didn't come after me. Robert was waiting in the car, watching silently. Everything all right? He asked. No, I said. But it will be. He nodded, started the engine. As we drove back through Millbrook, past the vineyard, past the town that had quietly risen around me like a second family, I felt something shift. Not closure, there's no such thing when your own children betray you, but clarity. Samuel was gone, but his work remained. And so did I. Linda Westbrook wasn't just the widow of a vineyard owner. She was the vineyard now. Its roots, its memory, its future.